first off, it's 2020. The world is ending. Lockdown is happening, and we're all getting a little scared, not just of dying, but of our income streams drying up, especially those of us that are self-employed. Normal people started making sourdough bread, learning Wordle, and watching reruns of Friends on Netflix. The rest of us just got back and reread the complete works of David J. Howe and Company. So during that time, you decide not just to start one podcast, but three. And now 5 years later, you're still doing it. Most recently, I just heard you do a deep dive into the Sensorites. Do you want to talk about the whole arc of how that started?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's become a bit of a cliche now that, particularly in the world of comedy, every comedian and their wife has a podcast. In fact, quite a few comedians and their wives started podcasts. So I was sort of twiddling my thumbs in lockdown. I wasn't really twiddling my thumbs because I've always kept myself sort of busy. I have to say I always struggle to find how people get bored. I wish I could get bored. There always seems to be something to do, and I'm largely unemployed freelancer, so I don't know quite how that works. But and I just thought I thought well. And I'd got because I broadcast on BBC Radio on a very obscure channel called Radio 4 Extra that does a sci-fi hour, plays archive stuff, and they'd dispensed with us initially during lockdown and just played the programs without sort of continuity. So I said, well, why don't I record some basic stuff that says, the Seventh Dimension will be back soon, but in the meantime, let's continue with the programming. And I kind of thought that was a failure because I was like, well, look, I'm here. If I can do that, I can do it. So and I liked that kind of that spirit that we all had, that bunker mentality of going, well, when things are bad, we can make the best of it. And creative people think that just involves writing a poem. And do you know what? Sometimes it does. So it's not very hard, but it makes you feel a bit heroic. Well, I recorded a thing, there's doctors and nurses there and emergency workers doing us. We go, yeah, I did a song that people liked. So I just thought, well, why don't I do something like that? Because it would get me brownie points in terms of my own self-esteem and actually just involve me doing what I normally do, which is saying things out loud. And eventually, and so to that end, and I was still doing voiceovers and things. I thought, well, it's perhaps I should get some equipment in so I can do it from home. So I built myself, and I'm talking to you from it now, Reuben. I would call it my studio, but it's basically a cupboard. These walls you see in my Doctor Who DVD shelves, which were 90 degrees against the wall, and I sort of inverted them, lined them with soundproofing. And so I recorded something for the BBC for them, and they went, "Wow, that sound quality is great." And I went, "Wow, I've managed to do something quite by accident." And I thought, well, there's I didn't think I thought there's a market for Doctor Who podcast because there's quite a few out there already. But I thought, well, I can have a bash at that. Why not? Because I listened to some Doctor Who podcasts and enjoyed them, and I thought, well, if I'm listening to Doctor Who podcasts and enjoying them, hopefully, somebody might want to listen to what I have to say just because I'm lucky enough to have had various platforms, so that I might get a few people who might be listeners before I've even started doing anything. So, and then it was, as you say, I came up with three ideas. I think the first idea was the indefinable magic, which is sort of whimsical essays, what you would do if you were doing a sort of Radio 4 type of sort of comedy is too strong a word. It's not intended to be out and out comedy, but light-hearted, whimsical, the sort of thing that will sort of put a smile on your face and be easy listening if you're a Doctor Who fan. Nothing too controversial, but yeah, sort of whimsical deep dive, sort of essays based on some trivial aspect of the show that I could just freewheel with, and attach a couple of jokes to. But they took a bit of writing. So I thought, well, I need to do something I could do quicker than that. And I thought, well, I could do a deep dive into every episode because all that material is there. I just have to sort of collate it. And then I was doing those, and I went, I don't actually want to go. I'm not sure I trust some of these sources entirely. I think that's wrong. So then I went back to the paperwork, and then I had to go back. And then suddenly they were taking ages as well. I was like, I need to do something I can do quickly. Commentaries, they're easy. So then the third idea I came up with was just to do a commentary where I would just do a commentary. But a friend of mine suggested, well, why don't you get? But I thought a positive commentary. Originally I was going to do it with my dog. I got this whole convoluted thing where I would do it and I would watch it with the dog and sort of go, and I'd do the dog's voice, go, oh, who's that actor, Daddy? And I'd go, oh, well, that was painful. I wonder if I've kept those. They would be a useful extra somewhere. So then somebody said, oh, we'll just get somebody to choose their favorite things. And then you've got a quest element while you're doing your commentary. You have to see if you can work out what their favorite thing will be. And it just gives it a little bit of extra drama is again too strong a word, but a little extra dimension to the thing. And they were the ones I could do quicker because I could just, once I'd got the contribution from the person, I just had to watch the episode, say what I say out loud, unprepared, unedited, blah, 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 and whack it out. So they became the sort of the foundations around which the other two will occasionally, you'll occasionally get a nice little games room or whatever in the form of one of the other two. But they, I kind of have to be, and now that there's no, I should have got a lot of those. Well, I did. I mean, I wrote the first, I think 4 or 5 of each of the other 2 strands during lockdown and thought, well, I'm way ahead with these, so I just have to keep ahead. And then, of course, real life got in the way, and now I really have to set days aside to do those other 2. But I've picked up speed a little bit recently, but it will ebb and flow. And the thing is, I'm not really answerable to anybody. So, and if I was, I'd love to do something like this for the BBC, but that way, they would be paying me, and I would probably have people to help, and I could do it on a regular basis. But as that doesn't seem to be happening, I'll just have to release them when I can, and that's fine. That's fine. So yeah, it was bred of it was bred of the pandemic to give me something to do, and I didn't realize quite what I'd got in store then for real life. But I've had some lovely support from people that's enabled me to do it and perhaps not do what I'd done pre-pandemic, which was spend a day traveling to a comedy gig somewhere in the middle of nowhere and getting back at 2:00 in the morning. I could go, well, I won't do that now. I've sort of bought myself some time in which I can write an indefinable magic or ring that Doctor Who director to get the story of their life to put into the too much information. So yeah, it's like everything, like a lot of good things. It started under sort of difficult, if you like, circumstances, and something nice came out of it. So I'm happy, and it gives me a focus. It's nice, as with anything in this business. If you're doing something, your juices are flowing, the machine is oiled, and actually, you as we get increasingly, I think, stuck in our cubby holes, it keeps me in touch with people, because people send their thoughts back to me, and even if I'm not seeing them, I'm in communication, and I think that is what makes it. And what I love about it, Reuben, I'm in communication with people all around the world, from different backgrounds with different experiences, and I think that is a beautiful thing.
It's a brilliant series of podcasts, and if you haven't had a chance to check them out, please do. If you're even a casual Doctor Who fan, you will be very entertained. And the deep dives you do, as well as the indefinable magic, is so well written. It's one of those that pulls at your heartstrings a little bit when you listen to it. So,
oh, bless you.
It's definitely worth checking out. One of the other things that also comes out of your podcasts, as you're talking, you're very open about how you grew up, younger and is a Doctor Who fan, and some of the things that we all deal with but don't always talk about. Feeling nervous at school, and not always having the most money growing up, and that's been really helpful to a lot of us that have gone through similar circumstances, and it's good to open that up to people so they're aware that they're not alone. Thank you for doing that.
Well, that's very kind. That's a kind of hangover from my one man show, Moths Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, where I hadn't realised I thought I was doing a comedy show about Doctor Who. I hadn't realised that people would come up to me afterwards and go, "I identified with that aspect." And sometimes it was an aspect of school life, sometimes it was an aspect of coming from a single parent family. There's that. I hadn't anticipated that, and people, when people say that, it surprises me, and then I remember that other people have said it as well. So it certainly wasn't intentional, but it's nice that is a side effect of that. And I guess it ties in with that thing of, that we all, what unites us as people is that even if our backgrounds aren't specifically the same, our experiences, our common human experiences, unite us, or help us to empathize with each other. Or hopefully help us to get a funny joke, whatever.
Yes. So speaking of Moths Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, that kind of kick-started you into the larger world of Doctor Who fandom, which you've almost become the face of at this point. At least with the Blu-ray releases and everything like that. Can you talk a little bit, first about how Moths started, and then how after that, all of a sudden you got into doing commentaries and interviews, all that kind of stuff.
And I think there's definitely there is a direct correlation, but I'll take you back before we get to that. Connect those two dots, as it were. I've been a stand-up comic since 1994, something. I was still doing it. I started doing it at university, but I was a semi-pro then. I was getting paid gigs, and then when I left university, I was doing the normal stuff of waiting on tables like most budding creatives do, and I wasted a lot of time actually, but I did have partially because I'd started getting paid stand-up gigs, so I was able to say to people, actually, I'm a comedian, even if that meant I was getting a 40 quid gig every 3 weeks or whatever. Although those gigs that paid 40 quid then still pay 40 quid now. That's a terrible sign of the times. I was earning a fortune, but compared to now. And then so I'd been a stand-up for a long time, and I'd ended up emceeing a club regularly. So my machine, as it were, was being oiled on a regular basis. And a friend of mine suggested I do no, a friend of mine suggested I write a book. He's got a lot of get up and go. This friend of mine, Mark. He said you can write a book in 14 days. I've got a theory. He always latches on to theories. He's a bit of a sort of Del Boy character, Mark, but he's great and enthusiastic. Has never been hampered by the lack of confidence and the shrinking violet thing that I think holds a lot of us back. And what's great when you have a friend like that is that they're not shrinking violets on your behalf as well. And so he sort of encouraged me, and I said, well, I've got a title actually, and I told him about Moths Eating My Doctor Who Scarf, which was a genuine thing that happened. And I thought it was a great metaphor for getting older, your childhood trinkets getting gnawed away at by nature, entropy, fate, cynicism, whatever. It works on so many levels. And he said, oh, that's not a book. He said, that's an Edinburgh show. And I hadn't considered doing Edinburgh. And again, I didn't have any money, but he'd sort of left the world of stand-up and acting because I think he likes the finer things life, and was a businessman, not a high-end business. He had a skip business, waste disposal. So, but he was, he was more sort of fiscally sound than I was. And he said, and he said, look, I'll sponsor your show if I can get my logo on your posters. I'll give you the, I'll pay for your accommodation and your theatre hire, which, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a fortune, but it is a fortune if you're a self-employed jester with a young family and all of that. So I couldn't have done it without him. And all he wanted in return, his logo on my posters, but also he wanted to direct the show. Now, directing a one-man show isn't saying stand over there, let's have a spaceship coming out here. He was more a third eye on it, and thank God he was, because he came up with a lot of we had so many jokes that Doctor Who fans would have loved that everybody else wouldn't have understood. And as I previewed it, and he came to every preview and he drove me to everyone, he said, just quite close to the end, he said, I'm going to say something bold here, but take out all the jokes that are nothing that are about Doctor Who, but that don't have some impact on your personal journey. And the show had originally taken place in 4 different time zones and had jokes that worked backwards and was quite sort of concept heavy. He said, the story is you and your dad not being there, and the ending is you watching Doctor Who with your kids, which in the original show happened in about the middle. And he said, that's the show. That's the journey. He said, people don't care about your jokes about unit dating, or we had one section of the show was a complete and utter history of Doctor Who in 15 minutes. And it was full of Doctor Who jokes, and it was me narrating the whole thing. And it made, and when I first ran it through, it was the funniest bit. And that all went. He said, people won't care because it's not about you. You're not in that bit. That's all Doctor Who. So that was the genius actually of how that show ended up being what it was because it wasn't really about Doctor Who. It was about a little boy who didn't have a dad, who had that anchor. Because even people who'd never seen, and so people who'd never seen Doctor Who fans were going to like it anyway, really, if they were so inclined, because they were watching shows saying that Doctor Who was great. But the beauty was people who came with their girlfriends or boyfriends who were Doctor Who fans, who themselves didn't care about Doctor Who came out going, oh, I understood the bit about when you're at school. I understood the bit about feeling nervous. I understood this. So that's why it was ultimately successful, because I think a lot of the critics went in expecting to get a Doctor Who love in and went out having something that resonated a bit more personally and autobiographically. And so that did well. It got really good reviews in Edinburgh. Word of mouth was very good. It sort of upped my profile a bit, and then I toured it, and it went to the West End, and it got a BBC radio show. So as a result of that, my name was flying about. But actually, it was on a Doctor Who forum. Somebody sent me a private message and said, "I saw your show in Buxton. I think you'd be great on the DVD range. Have you ever thought of doing something like that?" And the original plan was for me to do some comedy extras, like, because the one on Pyramids of Mars, Oh Mummy, had just come and been very, very successful and very funny. And I met this guy, and we hit it off. And the more I thought about it, the more I worried that, much as I'd have loved to have been on the DVD range, I knew that Doctor Who fans, Oh Mummy was an exception because it was so very good, but generally the comedy extras didn't really have the budget to do enough and be funny enough to sort of justify them being there, instead of what I, as a purchaser, would want, was an interview with a designer. I'm a Doctor Who fan. I'd much rather see an interview with the designer than a comedy sketch. And I love comedy, no matter how funny comedy is. But I still entertained the idea, and we pitched a few ideas back and forth. And as we were doing this, I moaned to him about the lineup for the War Machines commentary, because it was just Annika and Michael Ferguson for the whole 4 episodes, and there was no making of. And I was like, there's so many actors from that who are still around. If you're not doing a making of, it's criminal not to have them on the commentary. And the word came back saying, oh, well, I think they thought they were dead. And I was like, 2 of them are still in Spotlight, the actors directory. And I mean, they're not hard to find. I'm furious at that sort of lack of ambition. That makes me really cross. And so if I can find them and I'm not even doing it, why can't you? And that's what you're supposed to. And I think that maybe translated itself into something. And he said, "Oh, would moderating a commentary and being involved in that be something that you would be interested in?" And I mean, some people practice their Oscar acceptance speeches. I used to when I was cycling along. I used to practice moderating Doctor Who DVDs because I thought it would be right up my street. So I said, yes, absolutely I would, and I got the chance to do a couple, assuming that I would do the odd one or two, and it's what, how many years later? It's probably 15, 16 years later, maybe even more than that. And I'm the first one I did. I actually did the day that my one man show opened at the West End, so that was quite a day. I moderated The Rescue and the Romans in the morning and opened my show in the West End of London that evening. And then when I went to bed after that day, and then the news came through that the radio version had been nominated for a Sony. So if that was probably the height. I've been traveling downhill ever since, but I've managed to keep going, and that meant I was kind of in then. And often with these things, if you're looking around to do something, you go, oh, that guy's done it before and he didn't screw it up. Let's use him. It's often it's as pragmatic as that. We know he can do it and he's cheap. Let's get him back again. So I've kept doing it, but every time, I thought once the DVDs were over, that would be it. And then the Blu-ray started, and it's happened all over again. So I've been really lucky that it's provided those sorts of opportunities, and then the ambition with things like the documentaries, I think, got a bit bigger. People like Chris Chapman making the films that they're making, which were more than just talking heads in front of a green screen, but actually trying to push the boat out and make shows that were TV shows as opposed to sort of electronic press kits, if you like. That's not to denigrate what had gone before. Budgets were tight and the new ways of doing things, and those early documentaries are amazing. And I know that they were done, the Dalek Invasion of Earth ones, for example, I know were done for no money at all, and they got so many different people on that most of whom are no longer with us, so they're invaluable records. But as time went on and they worked out how to do things and they had an infrastructure and people, they could get more ambitious, and I think it's grown, and some of those shows, including ones I've had nothing to do with, I think everyone involved should be really proud of.
Yeah, the newer extras, where you do it on location or you're searching for a particular actor that we may not know a lot about, or that kind of thing. Those are always my first go-to whenever a new box set comes out, because
Oh, good.
they're always very heartwarming. Makes you feel good about the day, and then you can kind of sit down and do the deep dive on the rest of the things you've seen 100 times, but just in much better quality. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's a nice balance on the range because those things are quite heartfelt and quite sort of personal, but then you've got the lighter hearted stuff of the behind the sofas or the escape room stuff, and then you've got the sort of drier, more factual things as well. So I think we're very, very well served, really. It's nice to be a part of. But the fact that all that other stuff exists means we can do a thing where we, spend a lot of time just talking to the family of somebody who might have, I mean, in the latest one, who was in 4 episodes of Doctor Who, but it tells a wider story, and again, it sort of connects things and people in a way that if it was just those, I think it would tip the scales too far in one direction. But because it exists as part of a whole mosaic of stuff, I think it's a good part of the mix.
yeah. So stepping back a few years, during the 50th, you did a series of interviews with the goal of one person involved in the story for, I think it was every episode of classic Doctor Who. It's on the Big Finish website, and it's quite entertaining, and you managed to get an amazing variety of people that we've never heard from before. So do you want to talk a little bit about the process on that?
I think it might have been a dream, Reuben. I'm not sure it actually happened. I've actually been in the process of going back over some of them, and on my Patreon page releasing the sort of full interviews because some of them I cut down for time or various different reasons. It's been nice revisiting them and presenting them with a bit of backstory of how I contacted the people and whether we stayed in contact. Um, the only downside is I have to listen to myself, which I need a run up to do. It makes me feel physically sick. And that happened because somebody on Twitter. I was having not a great New Year's Eve coming up to Doctor Who's 50th anniversary, which I thought would be the best year ever. I was in personal circumstances that were shall we say, not ideal, and feeling very sorry for myself, particularly on New Year's Eve. Which, as you know, if you're feeling good, your loved upness gets buoyed, and if you're feeling bad, everything seems even worse than it normally would because everyone else is having such a great time and it's a milestone and you're considering where you are. And I was at my mum's house, sort of slightly lost, at approaching 40 as well, and this person said, my ambition for Doctor Who's 50th is that Toby Hadoke interviews everyone from Doctor Who. And he was so sweet to sort of get name checked. Not that, somebody from Doctor Who is interviewed during the 50th, but he wanted me to do it. And I thought that was very nice to appeal to my then very fractured ego. I needed to reply and say something. And I think I just said, well, I said, I thought it might be quite fun to get an anecdote from every story. And I think then Nick Briggs expressed an interest in putting it on for Big Finish because I had no clue. I actually didn't realize how easy it was. Now that I do my own podcasts, you just have to press a button, really. But I assumed it would all be beyond my ken. And I was staying with a friend of mine at the time who was technical, so he'd got a very good Tascam recorder that he lent me in order to record these things. And I basically, whilst I was putting my life back together, staying at my friend's house, I basically started putting out messages. And the original plan had been, I thought this will be easy. I know Fraser Hines. That's all the Troughton stories. But I know Louise Jameson. That's a good chunk of Tom Baker. But as I was sort of looking around, I thought, well, who would I like to hear from? Because it's always my attitude with the range is, what would I like to see? What sort of program would I like to see? And if people aren't making it, why don't I? And with this, I thought, well, I've always been interested in the people who make one-off visits to the show because I sometimes think their memories of a story will be sharper than somebody for whom that story was one of 25 or one over the course of 3 years or whatever. And I've always been interested in the guest actors as well because they've been in other stuff that I'm interested in, and I've always been interested in an actor's life and all. And I think I have an empathy with them that I thought could probably make the interviews quite easy because I have this ridiculous memory where I can say, oh, and of course you were in that with so and so, and then they go, oh, how did you know that? And then they're flattered and pleased, which means that they give a better interview because I've made them happy and all of that. So I started sort of chasing. People from left field, and it was I'll credit Kevin McNally, Hugo Lang. He hadn't been in Flux at that point, because I thought he'd been very good on the Twin Dilemma documentary, not documentary, commentary. I thought he'd almost moderated it. He was real, and he clearly loved the show, and he was very respectful to Colin Baker. And Kevin McNally's had an amazing career, and I just thought I liked the cut of his jib. So I was a bit, I was watching the Doctor Who years on DVD, and I was a bit drunk, and they had a clip from the Twin Dilemma of Kevin McNally, and I remembered all that nice stuff about him. So I just put on my Facebook, does anyone know Kevin McNally? Which I wouldn't have done if I'd been sober. And that led to me getting Kevin's email address, and I emailed him. And on the way there, I put a thing out that said, I'm about to interview somebody from Doctor Who. Would you prefer if I just... He was about the 10th or 11th person I'd interviewed, I think. If I just asked them about Doctor Who, or if I asked them about other things as well. And it was about 50-50. But I was disappointed in the people who said, oh, just ask them about Doctor Who. And that told me what I need. My sort of gut reaction of going, why do you only want to know about Doctor Who? This person was in I, Claudius and this, that, and the other. and my disappointment with those people is another reflection on them, but that reaction made me go, oh, well, I clearly know what I want to be doing, which is I want to be asking them about everything. Use Doctor Who as a jump off point to talk about everything. And of course, it makes it easier as well, because if they go, I don't remember anything about Doctor Who, don't worry, Doctor Who is trivial. And you actually end up getting more then, because they remember more than they thought they did. Um, and that interview with Kevin went really, really well. And he was great, and he was very kind and open to the whole process. But bear in mind, this guy was still starring in Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you know what I mean? Um, and so that made me a bit more ambitious. And then I sort of thought, well, with the censor rights, we got everybody for the commentary. Everybody, apart from Ilona Rogers, because she lives in New Zealand. So we were never going to get her for the commentary. So I thought, well, that's who I have to get for Who's Round then, because I've met all the others. And so then I started looking at people in Australia and New Zealand, because we could do Skype. So if a lot of them, my first ones were actually international. And then people started approaching me as well. One of the first approaches I got was from Glyn Jones, who wrote the Space Museum, whose friend had seen my appeal online. I don't know how. And he was in Crete. So I Zoomed it, Skyped him one morning. I wish some of those earlier ones, because I was worried about taking up too much of people's time. I cut them short at sort of 20 or 30 minutes, whereas actually I soon after that I realized once you've got people, they'll talk as long as you want. And in fact, there's a guy called Gordon Stern who's in the Ambassadors of Death. I stopped the interview after 25 minutes, and then we talked for another hour. And if I'd kept recording, I would have had so much gold, and he would have been happy for that too. So I learned as I went along, and I should have had much more out of Glyn Jones as well. He'd approached me. Why did he care? He was more than happy. But I'm not a professional in that regard. I was just sort of gathering people, but it meant that I didn't go for the usual suspects, and it meant that it was a much longer process than it could have been. But it meant I met some fascinating people, some of whom I'm still in touch with, many of whom are now no longer with us. But I'll tell you what, Reuben, it's a hell of a therapeutic way to get through a divorce. I was traveling the country. I was tying it in with my gigs and things like that. And quite a few times serendipity happened that somebody was in Norwich and I happened to have a gig in Norwich, and I could work it into my, my traveling around the country. And I did have good luck in that regard in a lot of times. But I remember being absolutely exhausted because I was on the road and then I was trying to fit it in. So if I had a gig in the evening, I'd try and interview one person in the morning, one in the afternoon, and go, I couldn't do it now.
Yeah.
And I was shattered. But what it did was it took my mind off all of the other stuff, which is sort of what Doctor Who is. I think that's what Doctor Who's for, isn't it?
Yeah.
And now we've got this good bank of 250 episodes. So yeah, but I'm not doing it again.
Well, during that same time, you also, in conjunction with Robert Sherman, decided to watch every episode of Classic Who, and then write not one, not two, but three books on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if we knew how many books it was going to be. I can't remember now. That was entirely Rob's idea. And actually Rob's idea of doing it and doing it positively then bled into my Happy Times and Places podcast, which is also let's come at this from a positive angle, because it's so easy to fall into the and the internet exacerbates that, as we know. It's easy to say what we don't like. It was entirely Rob's idea. Rob was the person who had the name and the cachet, and it was very generous of him to ask me along for the ride, and we had great fun doing that. And yes, volume 3 is on its way. It's entirely dependent on Rob's timetable, because we do have to sort of get together to do it properly, and we did it at the time, and I think Rob's stuff all exists in note form. Last time I saw him, he was even of the opinion that we should just sort of do it again. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but he is minded that we need to get that last book out, and we will. Just when, I'm not entirely sure, but it's not down to me; it's down to him.
Oh, And then in addition to all your Doctor Who work, is it 25 years now you've been running Excess Malarkey or more?
Uh, it's just past 27.
Oh, wow.
Oh no, 26. Hang on. What? 1990, 24, 25, 26, 20. Yeah, it's just past 20, 27, 27, 27. I'm going to say 27 and I'm sticking to it. It's 26 or 27. I'm sure we've just done our 27th, we've just done a birthday. I think it's the 27th. Yes. Yeah, so that's a comedy club that I started again like anything. I thought it would be something that would give me something to do for a few weeks. But a bit like the I'm sad about the mistakes I made with Who's Round, but partially not knowing what I was doing kind of got me through it in a way. So I have to sort of take that. And the same with the comedy, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I just had it in mind that I wanted everyone that came this week to want to come next week. I kept it as simple as that. So anything that happened that made me think people wouldn't come next week, like that table being obnoxious or this, that, or the other, I would just give that table their money back and say go away. And then the rest of the audience would go, oh, he's not interested in the money. He's interested in us having a good time. And that bred a kind of vibe that the show has to this day. We were quite quiet last night because there was an election on. It was bonfire night. There were lots of other things to distract people, but we still had a good, a decent, a size audience that any Tuesday night comedy club should be happy with, and it was all full of people who I recognised because they come, if not every week, at least once a month, and there's a sort of a regular crew who love it and feel comfortable and safe there to and it means that the comics who can sometimes be a bit more experimental or off the wall know that they're going to be received in good faith, and it's just a lovely place to be. So but it kind of got that hadn't been my intention. It just kind of evolved that way, and yeah, it's extraordinary that I mean, I've been doing it for more than half of my life now, which seems bizarre, but it's given me something to do every Tuesday, which is quite nice. Not, don't know what I'd have done on Tuesdays otherwise. Tuesday's a funny old day.
Yeah, I was really surprised because I came at it from the Doctor Who angle when I went and visited there, and everyone in the audience was so friendly and appreciative. And there are people that were telling me, I've been going to this for 15 years, and that's
Yeah, it's
it's
really
a
touching and nice. Yeah,
tight knit little community. So
yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely, and of nice people. And even if not every act is gonna be good or have a good night or go down, but but even the acts that struggle sort of no, but they don't get any hassle. They're allowed to do their bit. You'll only know you've struggled as an act if the audience is a little bit quieter than usual. They'll still really try and laugh if then they'll still give you a nice round of applause afterwards. There's no unpleasantness. Now, some people like sort of catcalling and heckling at comedy nights, and there's a rich tradition of that, and that's absolutely fine. But I think it's also nice to have one where there isn't that, and that's what this is. And people still chip in, but it's always fun and friendly rather than calling people names or whatever. And what that does mean that the comics that are slightly more avant-garde actively thrive there because they've got a willing audience who go, okay, if that's what you're giving us, we'll take it, rather than I think the rowdier crowds can be a bit more conservative, not politically, but in their sort of the narrowness of their tastes, if you like, with what they expect. I think you can have a slightly more eclectic approaches to comedy on a night like mine, and that's quite fun because it means you never quite know what you're going to expect, quite know what to expect.
yeah, and then rounding up here on yet another topic, um, you're a Quatermass super fan, um, and I believe you have a book coming out here shortly.
Yes, I wish I could give you a date, but I'm assured it's. I mean, I thought it was going to be before Christmas, but as we're recording this in the first week of November, and I haven't got a solid date, I'm not sure that's now going to happen, which makes me sad. But it shows the effort that is being gone into the presentation of it. It will be. I would, in the long run, I would rather it came out a month later than well, especially as it's already coming out about 30 years later than I'd hoped, but a month later and be perfect than Russia. There's no point rushing out. And Stuart, the publisher, who's also the designer, who's brilliant, is very much of the mind of, well, anyone that's going to buy this is going to buy it. So when we release it is less important than releasing it in the right state. And he's worked very hard on it. I'm not sure Quatermass should have fans because my mum watched it. It almost demeans it and it shouldn't, because I'm a fan. Of course, I'm a fan. But because I see it as a sort of as a totem of mainstream entertainment, which it was in the 1950s. It was whatever. Not it wasn't cult. It was a mainstream success, and it was important in terms of television and then in terms of film, as much, if not more important than it was in terms of genre. Although it is the grandfather of a number of Doctor Who stories. But I think it's such an important piece of television, and I think it's so good. And yeah, I mean, I spent yesterday, looking into births, marriages, and deaths, and cross-referencing newspaper files and this, that, and the other, to see if I could nail down exactly the life story of man who plays guard in episode 2 of Quatermass 2. So this is so I mean the book will be full of stuff. But I think it's the serious examination that Quatermass deserves. And I say serious, a lot of stuff that's written about Quatermass and Nigel Neal is very well written, but it's of the academic kind, with all the footnotes and the this, that, and the other. And I didn't want to. And I wondered if I was going to be forced into doing that. And I talked to Stuart, the publisher, about it. He said, "No, write your book, write what you want." And I don't really want somebody to read something about Quatermass that says the diegetic operatics of the text, two. I hope it's accessible, and I've also, occasionally put a sentence in that has a sense of humor about it, without being arch or piss takey. But I hope it's light and I hope it's accessible, whilst at the same time doing really detailed paragraphs about why those two extras might not have turned up on that filming day, and why they might have in fact been doing that scene in an episode that we can't see but can glean this from the paperwork. So it's right in there, but I hope it's not sort of dense, and it's certainly not po-faced, but it's really appreciative of the piece. It probably concentrates more on the actors than most people would, because I like stories about actors. But I wrote to I've been writing I started writing to actors from Quatermass in 1989, so I've got lots of letters and interviews with people, all of whom are now dead. I've got photographic material that nobody's ever seen. And I mean, it's been a sort of life's work, really. And that was going to be one book, but now we've split it into volumes. So the first volume is just on the first one, the Quatermass Experiment. Not the films, not any spin-offs, they're for later volume. So this is just on 6 episodes of television that went out in 1953, and I've got 120,000 words out of it. So, and I really hope people like it. I Yeah, and in a way, if it had come out any earlier, if it had come out when it should have done, there's loads of material that I've since unearthed that I wouldn't have had then. So in a way, my own procrastination has been justified by fate, which has turned up all of this other really interesting stuff. And I think if you don't know anything about Quatermass, it should be illuminating. And if you know a lot about Quatermass, I would venture to say I found out more. So I think, I think that's fine. And I'm just glad that there's a book out. There will be a book out there about Quatermass, and I'm even more glad that it's me that's written it.
It's wonderful. Very much looking forward to that. So,
thanks. It's a long time coming. But it's going to look gorgeous as well because Stuart is a great designer, and he showed me the cover. I have a cover, and I'm really happy with it. It's lovely.
And this is 10 Acre Films, Reckitt.
Yeah, yeah, 10 Acre Films. Yeah.
They do.
So yeah, keep an eye on their website. They've just done a reprint of their book, their graphic design book, which might have edged me down the pile a little bit, but that's fine. I'll forgive them because it's a lovely piece of work. And as I say, any delay is only about getting it looking absolutely splendid. So in the great scheme of things, that's what's most important.
Wonderful. Well, we're getting towards our time limit here that we've been allocated. So I'd like to thank Toby for graciously taking so much of his time and giving us a little background about Doctor Who and his career and his arc there. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for asking me.